Hello, viewers of the future. Endragh here. We're back for maybe the ending of the Color of Magic. I don't know. We've only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 pages left, so we'll see. Anyways, let's jump right into it. Rincewind and Twoflower are now wearing the suits, are planning to walk out as if they're the Chenomers, and hopefully get away with it. Who knows? And there's a monster attacking the harbor of Krull. Boop. Okay. The potent Voyage, no longer the blank bronze shell that had been smashed from the mold a few days earlier, rested in its cradle on top of a wooden tower in the center of the arena. In front of it, a railway ran down towards the edge, where for the space of a few yards it turned suddenly upward. The late Doctos Goldeneye, who had designed the launching pad as well as the pointed Voyage itself, had claimed that this last touch was merely to ensure that the ship would not snag on any rocks as it began its long plunge. Maybe it was merely coincidental that it would also, because of that little twitch in the track, leap like a salmon and shine theoretically in the sunlight before disappearing into the cloud sea. There was a fanfare of trumpets at the edge of the arena. The Chelonauts' honor guard appeared, to much cheering from the crowd. Then the white-suited explorers themselves stepped out into the light. It immediately dawned on the arch-astronomer that something was wrong. Heroes always walked in a certain way, for example. They certainly didn't waddle, and one of the Chelonauts was definitely waddling. The roar of the assembled people of Krull was deafening, as the Chelonauts and their guards crossed the great arena, passing between the many altars that had been set up for the various wizards and priests of Krull's many sects to ensure the success of the launch. The arch-astronomer frowned. By the time the party was halfway across the floor, his mind had reached a conclusion. By the time the Chelonauts were standing at the foot of the ladder that led to the ship, and was there more of a hint of reluctance about them? The arch-astronomer was on his feet, his words lost in the noise of the crowd. One of his arms shot out and back, fingers spread dramatically in the traditional spell-casting position, and any passing lip-readers who were also familiar with the standard text on magic would have recognized the opening words of Vesticake's floating curse, and would then have prudently ran away. Its final words remained unsaid, however. The arch-astronomer turned in astonishment as a commotion broke out around. Its final words remained unsaid, however. The arch-astronomer turned in astonishment as a commotion broke out around the big arched entrance to the arena. Guards were running out into the daylight, throwing down their weapons as they scuttled among the altars or vaulted the parapets into the stands. Something emerged behind them, and the crowd around the entrance ceased its cheering and began a silent, determined scramble to get out of its way. The something was a low dome of seaweed, moving slowly but with a sinister sense of purpose. One guard, overcome his horror sufficiently to stand in its path and hurl its spear, which landed squarely among the weeds. The crowd cheered, then went deathly silent as the dome surged forward and engulfed the man completely. The arch-astronomer dismissed the half-formed shape of Vesticate's famous curse with a sharp wave of his hand, and quickly spoke the words of one of the most powerful spells in his repertoire, the inferior combustion engine. Octarine fire spiraled around and between his fingers as he shaped the complex runes of the spell in mid-air and sent it screaming and trailing blue smoke towards the shape. There was a There was a satisfying explosion, and a gout of flame shot up into the clear morning sky, shredding flakes of burning seaweed on the way. A cloud of smoke and steam concealed the monster for several minutes, and when it cleared, the dome had completely disappeared. There was a large charred circle on the flagstones, however, in which a few clumps of kelp and bladder wreck still smoldered, and in the center of the circle was a perfectly ordinary, if somewhat large, wooden chest. It was not even scorched. Someone on the far side of the arena started to laugh, but the sound was broken off abruptly as the chest rose up on dozens of what could only be legs and turned to face the arch astronomer. A perfectly ordinary, if somewhat large wooden chest does not, of course, have a face with which to face, but this one was quite definitely facing. In precisely the same way as he understood that, the arch astronomer was also horribly aware that this perfectly normal box was in some indescribable way narrowing its eyes. It began to move resolutely towards him. He shuddered. "Magicians!" he screamed. "Where are my magicians?" Around the arena, pale-faced men peeled out from behind altars and under benches. One of the bolder ones, seeing the expression on the arch astronomer's face, raised an arm tremendously and eased the hasty thunderbolt. It hissed towards the chest and struck it squarely in a shower of white sparks. That was the signal for every magician, enchanter, and thaumaturgist in Krull to leap up eagerly and, under the terrified eyes of their master, unleash the first spell that came to each desperate mind. Charms curved and whistled through the air. Soon the chest was lost to view again in an exploding cloud of magical particles, which billowed out and wreathered it in twisting, disquieting shapes. Spell after spell screamed into the melee. Flames and lightning bolts of all 8 colors stabbed out brightly from the seething thing that now occupied the space where the box had been. Not since the Mage Wars had so much magic been concentrated on one small area. The air itself waved and glittered. Spells recoated off spell, created short-lived wild spells which spells recoiled off spells, creating small-lived wild spells whose brief half-life was both weird and uncontrolled. The stones under the heaving mass began to buckle and split. One of them, in fact, turned into something best left undescribed, and slunk off into some dismal dimension. Other strange side effects began to manifest themselves. A shower of small lead cubes bounced out of the storm and rolled along the heavied floor. An Eldrith shape glimmered and beckoned obscenely. Four-sided triangles and double-edged circles existed momentarily before merging again into the booming, screaming tower of runaway raw magic that boiled up from the molten flagstone and spread out over Krull. It no longer mattered that most of the magicians had ceased their spellcasting and fled. The thing was now feeding on the stream of octarine particles that were always at their thickest near the edge of the disk. Throughout the islands of Krull, every magical activity failed, as all the available mana in the area was sucked into the cloud, which was already a quarter of a mile high, and screaming out into mind-curling shapes. Hydrophobes on their sea-skimming lenses crashed screaming into the waves. Magical potions turned to merely impure water in their fallacies. Magical swords melted and dripped from their scabbards. But none of this in any way prevented the thing at the base of the cloud, now gleaming magical bright in the intensity of the power storm around it, from moving as it steadily walked pace towards the arch astronomer. Rincewind and Twoflower watched in awe from the shelter of the pointed Voyage's launch tower. The honor party had long since vanished, leaving their weapons scattered behind them. "Well," sighed Twoflower at last. "There goes the luggage," he sighed. "Don't you believe it," said Rincewind. "Sapient Purewood is totally impenetrable to all known forms of magic. It's been constructed to follow you anywhere. I mean, when you die, if you go to heaven, you'll at least have a clean pair of socks in the afterlife. But I don't want to die yet, so let's just get going, shall we?" "Where?" said Twoflower. Rincewind picked up a crossbow and a handful of quarrels. "Anywhere that isn't here," he said. "What about the luggage?" "Don't worry. When the storm has used up all the free magic in the vicinity, it'll just die out." In fact, that was already beginning to happen. The billowing cloud was still flowing up from the area, but now it had a tenuous, harmless look about it. Even as Twoflower stared, it began to flicker uncertainly. Soon it was a pale ghost. The luggage was now visible as a square shape among the almost invisible flames. Around it, the rapidly cooling stone began to crack and bubble. Twoflower called softly to his luggage. It stopped its store-lid progress across the tortured flags, and appeared to be listening intently, then moved its dozens of feet in an intricate pattern. It turned on its length and headed towards the potent Voyager. Rincewind watched it sourly. The luggage had an elemental nature, absolutely no brain, a homicidal attitude towards anything that threatens its master, and he wasn't quite sure that its inside occupied the same space-time framework as its outside. "Not a mark on it," said Twoflower cheerfully, as the box settled down in front of him. He pushed open the lid. "This is a fine time to change your underwear," snarled Rincewind. "In a minute all those guards and priests are going to come back, and they're going to be upset, man." "Water," muttered Twoflower. Water," muttered Twoflower. "The whole box is full of water." Rincewind peered over his shoulder. There was no sign of clothes, money bags, or any other of the tourists' belongings. The whole box was full of water. A wave sprang up from nowhere and lapped over the edge. It hit the flagstone, but, instead of spreading out, began to take the shape of a foot. Another foot, and the bottom half of a pair of legs followed as more water streamed down as if filling an invisible mold. A moment later, Tethys, the sea troll, was standing in front of them, blinking. "I see," he said at last. "You two. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised." He looked around, ignoring their astonished expressions. "All right, brief pause here. Hold on, I'm going to even pause my timer." So what I thought I thought there was like a moment beforehand where like it's just him looking at the beach, and then the luggage comes up and snaps at him, but I guess not, and I just missed. I guess I just made that up, or maybe I'm just like remembering how he describes it later on. But yeah, so I thought there was a scene with him being picked up by the luggage. Guess not. All right, keep reading. Yeah, this is the point that I was probably thinking of. "I was just sitting outside my hut, watching the sunset, when this thing came roaring up out of the water and swallowed me," he said. "I thought it was rather strange. Where is this place?" "Krull," said Rincewind. He stared hard at the now closed luggage, which was managing to project a smug expression. Swallowing people was something it did quite frequently, but always when the lid was next opened, always when the lid was next opened, there was nothing left inside but Twoflower's laundry. Savagely, he wrenched the lid up. There was nothing inside but Twoflower's laundry. It was perfectly dry. "Well, well," said Tetris. He looked up. Hey," he said. Hey," he said. "Isn't this the ship they're going to send over the edge?" "Isn't it? It must be." An arrow zipped through his chest, leaving a faint ripple. He didn't appear to notice. Rincewind did. Soldiers were beginning to appear at the edge of the arena, and a number of them were peering around the entrance. Another arrow bounced off the tower behind Twoflower. At this range, the bolts did not have a lot of force, but it would only be a matter of time. "Quickly," said Twoflower. "Into the ship! They won't dare fire at that!" "I knew you were going to suggest that," groaned Rincewind. "I just knew it." He aimed a kick at the luggage. It backed off a few inches, and opened its lid threateningly. A spear arced out of the sky, and trembled to a halt in the woodwork by the wizard's ear. He screamed briefly and scrambled up the ladder after the others. Arrows whizzed around them as they came out into the narrow catwalk that led along the spine of the potent Voyage. Twoflower led the way, jogging along with what Rincewind considered to be too much suppressed excitement. Atop the center of the ship was a large, round bronze hatch with hasps around it. The troll and the tourist knelt down and started to work on them. I don't know who's talking here, but in the heart of the potent Voyage, fine sand had been tinkering into carefully designed cups for several hours. Now the cups was filled by exactly the right amount of dip down and upset a carefully balanced weight. The weight swayed away, pulling a pin from an intricate little mechanism. A chain began to move. There was a clunk. "What was that?" said Rincewind urgently. He looked down. The hail of arrows had stopped. The crowd of priests and soldiers were standing motionless, staring intently at the ship. A small, worried man elbowed his way through them and started to shout something. "What was that?" said Twoflower, busy with a wing nut. "I thought I heard something," said Rincewind. "Look," he said, "we'll threaten to damage the thing if they don't let us go, right? That's all we're going to do, right?" "Yeah," said Twoflower vaguely. He sat down on his heels. "That's it," he said. "It ought to lift off now." Several muscular men were swarming up the ladder to the ship. Rincewind recognized the two Chenlonauts among them. They were carrying swords. He began. The ship lurched. Then, with infinite slowness, it began to move along the rails. In that moment of black horror, Rincewind saw that Twoflower and the troll had managed to pull the hatch up. A metal ladder inside led into the cabin below. The troll disappeared. "We've got to get off," whispered Rincewind. Twoflower looked at him, a strange, mad smile on his face. "Stars," said the tourist. "Worlds, the whole damn sky full of worlds, places no one will ever see, except me." He stepped through the hatchway. "You're totally mad," said Rincewind hoarsely, trying to keep his balance as the ship began to speed up. He turned as one of the Chenlonauts tried to leap the gap between the Voyager and the tower, landing on the curved flank of the ship, scabbered for an instant for purchase, failed to find any, and dropped away with a shriek. The Voyager was traveling quite fast now. Rincewind could see past Twoflower's head to the sunlit cloud sky and the impossible rainbow floating tantalizingly beyond it, beckoning fools to venture too far. He also saw a gang of men climbing desperately over the lower slopes of the launching ramp and manhandling a large bulk of tinder onto the track, in a frantic attempt to derail the ship before it vanished over the edge. The wheels slammed into it, but the only effort was to make the ship rock. Twoflower to lose his grip on the ladder and fall into the cabin. The hatch slammed down with a The wheels slammed into it, but the only effect was to make the ship rock, Twoflower to lose his grip on the ladder and fall into the cabin, and the hatch to slam down with a horrible sound of a dozen fidgety little catches snapping into place. Rincewind dived forward and scabbled at them, whimpering. The cloud sea was much nearer now. The edge itself, a rocky premeter to the arena, was startling close. Rincewind stood up. There was only one thing to do now, and he did it. He panicked blindly just as the ship's boigas hit the little upgrade and flung it, sparkling like a salmon, into the sky and over the edge. A few seconds later, there was a thunder of little feet, and the luggage cleared the rim of the world, legs still pumping determinedly, and plunged down into the universe. The end. Technically. There's another bit. Rincewind woke up and shivered. He was freezing cold. So this is it, he thought. When you die, you go to a cold, damp, misty, freezing place. Hades where the mournful spirits of the dead troops forever across the sorrow marshes. Where the mournful spirits of the dead troop forever across the sorrowful marshes, corpse lights flickering fitfully in the circle. Hang on a minute. Surely Hades wasn't this uncomfortable, and he was very uncomfortable indeed. His back ached where a branch was pressing into it, his legs and arms hurt where the twigs had lacerated them, and judging by the way his head was feeling, something hard had recently hit it. If this was Hades, it sure was hell. Hang on a minute. Tree? He concentrated on the word that floated up from his mind, although the buzzing in his ears and the flashing lights in front of his eyes made this an unexpected achievement. Tree. Wooden thing. That was it. Branches and twigs and things. And Rincewind. Laying in it. Tree. Dripping wet. Cold. Cold white clods all around. Underneath, too. Now that was odd. He was alive, and lying covered in bruises in a small thorn tree that was growing in a crevice in a rock that projected out of the foaming white wall that was the rimfall. The realization hit him in much the same way as an icy hammer. He shuddered. The tree gave a weakening creak. Something blue and blurred shot past him, dipping briefly into the thunderous waves, and whirled back and settled on a branch near Rincewind's head. It was a small bird with a tuft of blue and green feathers. It swallowed the little silver fish that it had snatched from the fall, and eyed him curiously. Rincewind became aware that there were lots of similar birds around. They hovered, darting and swooping easily across the face of the water. Every so often, one would rise. We don't need that now, because we gotta finish this book. Because I'm not doing a thing with one page. Okay. Every so often, one would rise, an extra plum of spray as it stole another dune morsel from the waterfall. Several of them were perched in the trees. They were as iridescent as jewels. Rincewind was entranced. He was in fact the first man to ever see the rimfishers, the tiny creatures who had long ago evolved a lifestyle quite unique even for the disc. Long before the Crollians had built the circumference, the rimfishers had devised their own effective method of policing the edge of the world for a living. They didn't seem bothered about Rincewind. He had a brief but chilling vision of himself living the rest of his life out in this tree, living on raw birds and such fish as he could snatch as they plummeted past. The tree moved distantly. Rincewind gave a whimper as he found himself sliding backwards, but managed to grab a branch. Only sooner or later he would fall asleep. There was a subtle change of scenes, a slight purplish tint to the sky. A tall, black-cloaked figure was standing on the air next to the tree. It had a scythe in one hand. Its face was hidden in the shadows of the hood. "I have come for thee," said the invisible mouth, in tones as heavy as a whale's heartbeat. The trunk of the tree gave another protesting creak, and a pebble bounded off Rincewind's helmet, as one root tore loose from the rock. Death himself always came in person to harvest the souls of wizards. "What am I going to die of?" said Rincewind. The tall figure hesitated. "Pardon?" it said. "Well, I haven't broken anything, and I haven't drowned, so what am I about to die of? You can't just be killed by death. There has to be a reason," said Rincewind. To his utter amazement, he didn't feel terrified anymore. For about the first time in his life, he wasn't frightened. Pity the experience didn't look like lasting for long. Death appeared to reach a conclusion. "You could die of terror," the hood intoned. The voice still had its graveling ring, but there was a slight tremor of uncertainty. "Won't work," said Rincewind smugly. "There doesn't have to be a reason," said Death. "I can just kill you." "Hey, you can't do that. It'd be murder." The cowl figure sighed and pulled back its hood. Instead of the grinning Death's head that Rincewind had been expecting, he found himself looking up into the pale and slightly transparent face of a rather worried demon, of sorts. "I'm making rather mess of this, aren't I?" it said wearily. "You're not Death. Who are you?" cried Rincewind. Scorfula. Scrofula. Scorfula? "Death didn't come," said the demon wretchedly. "There's a big plague on the Pezzopolis. He had to go and stalk the streets, so he sent me. No one dies of Scorfula. I've got my rights. I'm a wizard." All right. This is going to be my big chance," said Scorfula. "But look at it this way. If I hit you with this scythe, you'll be just as dead as you would be if Death had done it." "Who'd know?" "I'd know," snapped Rincewind. "You wouldn't. You'd be dead," said scophologically. Piss off, said Rincewind. That's all very well, said the demon, hefting the scythe, but why not try to see things from my point of view? This means a lot to me, and you've got to admit that your life isn't all that wonderful. Reincarnation can only be an improvement. His hand flew to his mouth, but Rincewind was already pointing a trembling finger at him. Reincarnation, he said excitedly. So it is true what the mystics say. I'm admitting nothing, said Scoffala testily. It was a slip of the tongue. Now, are you going to die willingly or not? No, said Rincewind. Please yourself, replied the demon. He raised the scythe. It whistled down in quite a professional way, but Rincewind wasn't there. He was in fact several meters below, and the distance was increasing all the time, because the branch had chosen that moment to snap and sent him on his interrupted journey towards the interstellar gulf. Come back! Screamed the demon. Rincewind didn't answer. He was lying belly down in the rushing air, staring down into the clouds that even now were thinning. They vanished. Below, the whole universe twinkled at Rincewind. There was Great Attune, huge and ponderous and pocketed with craters. There were the little disk moons. There were the giant gleam that could only be the there was the distant gleam that could only be the potent Voyage, and there were all the stars, looking remarkably like powdered diamonds spilled on the black velvet. The stars that lured and ultimately called the boldest towards them. The whole of creation was waiting for Rincewind to drop in. He did so. There didn't seem to be any alternatives. And that's the end of Color of Magic. I like this book a lot. It's weird because it's got some things that are not normal in later volumes. Death Comes Back Later, his personality is a lot different. But everything else kind of is the same, and I really like it. It's the start of the series, the Discworld series. We're going to start with normally what I'm going to do is there are some series out there, and Discworld is one of them, where the next book isn't always going to immediately continue this book. So Discworld is a very unique series where it's got multiple different main characters. And that's why I love it so much, because it's not just one character throughout the whole series. And there are some other series like that, where it's like, there's a gap between books, multiple months, whatever. So, normally, if I finish a book, and then there's a gap, I'll read a different book instead. This is the one time I'm not going to say one time, because it might come up again. But I'm going to actually read Light Fantastic afterwards. And you'll figure out why when you start listening to Light Fantastic. But normally, I will be changing to a different book series, or a different book, or a single book, or whatever. I've got a few over in my corner there that I can read through. But this time, I'm just going to go right up to the next book being Light Fantastic. And you'll get why once you start hearing Light Fantastic. But yeah, usually I'll change to something else. This time I won't. So, I have been Endragh. This has been the final episode of Color of Magic, the first book of the Discworld series. It's probably not my favorite of the Discworld series, but it's pretty high up there. I do really like this one just because it does start the series. And it's not my favorite. There's a few others that are my favorite, but this is a pretty high one. Anyways, I've been Endragh. I hope I brought a smile to your face. We'll be continuing with a new book tomorrow night called Light Fantastic, also by Terry Pratchett in the Discworld series. It's the follow-up to this one. Well, it's the next one in the series. Like I said, there's multiple heroes. This huge paragraph right here. Oops, wait. This huge paragraph from here to here are all Discworld books. So there's a lot of them because there's multiple characters and multiple plots and multiple things. The Discworld series is all in the same Discworld. So that's why they're all Discworld series. It's the world that they're all inhabiting. So, yeah. We'll be continuing with Light Fantastic tomorrow night, and I will see you then. Night-night, guys.